So this particular claim was a roof gutter window paint claim, and adjuster comes out, meets with the homeowner, says, Mr. Homeowner, we've determined that your damage is approximately, it's almost what, $69,000. From a homeowner's perspective, that's a significant amount of money. And, you know,
Why fight them?
A lot of people are like, wow, that's incredible. I'm getting $69,000 to repair, you know, damage on my house.
That goes back to what we said earlier. Most people are just shocked when they get any payment at all, much less a significant one.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, after further investigation, we realized that the adjuster had overlooked probably, I believe it was like 17 windows that they missed that had damage on. They missed some code-related items on the roof. How does that work as far as law and ordinance or code upgrades? That a homeowner has no clue, but you know the roof won't pass inspection.
It's usually at this point when a contractor drafts an estimate. And do you remember what the estimate was here, contractor? Say it's 90?
No, their estimate was around 130, I believe.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, with all the missed windows.
Yeah.
So the contractor itemizes those out because they're familiar with what they need to do to get a permit on them. So it's generally the insured is only made aware once they have a competing bid from a contractor that's saying these are the actual prices. And all the contractors that use it's the same estimating software. It's a software just like MS Word or Excel, and it's a software that's designed to, it's called Xactimate, and depending on who you ask, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of Xactimate. What it's getting at is trying to make this complex process. It has 200,000 line items in it, and there's so many hail claims. It's trying to ease that stress. So long before I ever got involved, back in the mid-90s, Xactimate kind of became the main estimating software. There's SimSol, there's other ones. But you're using the same software. It's not the contractor giving a one-page estimate with their unit prices that are perhaps indefensible. It's an accepted, known program, and Xactimate's the deal. So you had your estimate in Xactimate, and let's say whether it was Wheat Ridge or Arvada, or not a surprise, different municipalities require different items in order for you to meet code. Ice and water might be one. There's simple things though, even with code though, that it's sheathing. There's gaps in the very boards that they're trying to nail the roof into that don't meet manufacturer's installation guidelines or code 905.2.1. And they'll still become an issue sometimes. There's more obvious issues than just, oh, it's in Arvada and we missed that. And then there's the common ones too. Asphalt starter and ridge cap, components of the roofing themselves that the carrier's guidelines, the operating guidelines, which literally go from here to the end of the wall, 20 feet long if you stack them, ubiquitously, every single insurance company says that those items are included in their waste factor. You'll notice there's 40 squares being removed, so this is the actual, a square is a 10 by 10 foot area. So there's 4,029 square feet of roofing. Well, there's a waste factor because you're not going to order exactly 4,029 square feet and neatly place it up there. There's waste for cuts and different items. They'll claim that in this waste factor, so 4 squares times 93 or $400 that your asphalt starter and ridge are included. If you itemize those items separately and just wiped out the waste, those items separately are going to be somewhere around $1,200 to $1,500 for a roof like this. So once again, it's in their operating guidelines. And even as a public adjuster sometimes, when I give them all the documentation under the sun, they still don't want to pay for these items. And appraisal is fantastic because it takes it out of the operating guidelines that the carriers used to systematically reduce claims payouts. They have to name somebody independent and impartial on their side. Similarly on this side, we have to name an umpire because you can imagine if these appraisers start arguing, it's going to go to an umpire process. And that panel of 3, just like the Benjamin Franklin original appraisal language, is there to settle loss. Any signature between 2 out of those 3, the majority, is going to finalize the matter. It's a fantastic way because the little bit that I've seen claims go to litigation, it's not an easy, fast, or fun process. And it's really mind-boggling to think that if there wasn't the appraisal process, what would happen to all these small claims in Colorado?
That'd be crazy.
My job should have been almost totally unnecessary at that point. I say that consistently. If they paid claims in accordance with reason, in my opinion.
And so even though we use the exact same estimating software, if the proper line items aren't used or agreed upon, that's where a majority of these claim disputes come from.
Yeah.
And we have homeowners asking us, well, why aren't you coming to an agreement? What's the big holdup? And it's challenged to explain to homeowners, well, they left off certain components of your roof that we need to install.
Yeah.
And if they're not going to pay for it, we can't put it on for free.
Perfect example is the painting of a house. They'll have a clean item and then a painting of the wood siding. What about the fascia? What about the trim? What about the soffits? What about the prep work, the tarp? I recently went to a conference and heard from another public adjuster one of the best descriptions of Xactimate, and the real crux of what we're talking about is when you invite somebody to turkey dinner on Thanksgiving, you expect to be given more than a turkey drumstick on your plate. It's just a reasonable anticipation. That turkey dinner is going to, the cream corn, mashed potatoes, all that stuff inclusive. That's exactly what happens here, unfortunately. And there's line item information with all these line items too that might support why there's different line items. But for instance, if you see a paint estimate or any portion of your claim paid with 1, 2, 3 line items, it's a really good likelihood that they're missing items. Windows is another one.
This might be a good example. I believe there was paint on this one. And here it is.
Here it is, two
So
line
line
items.
items. Clean and pressure wash, and then stain and finish wood siding.
Yeah.
So where's the masking? Where's the prepping? Where's the tarping, cleanup?
And here's the argument that'll be made on their side. That's all included in the line item. That's somewhat ambiguous because if you click on the line item information, it might have to some degree. They'll even say that some scaffolding's included. But this line item does not presume it's 6 feet, or if it's above 6 feet, OSHA's requiring you guys to tie off. There's other considerations within this line item that it doesn't assume a number of feet, 37 feet off the ground, and therefore 6 feet should be fine and 80 feet should be fine as well. Instead, it has all these other line items to help adjust that. And once again, carrier's goal is to pay as little as possible to keep their insureds happy and the property that they're insuring, reasonably insurable. They don't want necessarily a bunch of hail damage and other items that might lead to another dispute regarding what's fair and proper. All of a sudden stuff starts leaking in the framing. They don't want that any more than the homeowner does. And it takes a lot of time and expense for them too, which they certainly pay attention to.
For sure. So, okay, we're at about $69,000 initially on this claim. After it went through the appraisal process, and again, the appraisal process is essentially the insured would acquire a guy like you, an appraiser.
Mm-hmm. They can't be a creditor of the property. They can't be related to the insured. Any relationship that might cause bias or something needs to be disclosed. It doesn't preclude a person from doing it, but on either side. There'll be some times where I'm meeting for an insurance adjustment, and the fellow appraiser will let me know that, hey, I used to do adjustments for this process before. It really depends on how fair I think that person is, whether I'll deem that acceptable. But if any person is not meeting the criteria of the appraisal clause, and oddly enough, is you'd assume this was from the Texas Standard Fire Policy, 1943. It's the boilerplate contract which all insurance contracts currently are based on. They add amendments, but a lot of the information was, they hashed that out more than like 80 years ago in that Texas Standard Fire Policy. Well, now we're seeing more and more in appraisal clauses. There's slightly different competent appraiser, independent, impartial. Some will just name independent, some just competent. That being said, regardless of what they name, have a competent, independent, impartial appraiser. In a dispute like this, the goal is not to try to game or drop any part of the system. You want somebody as professional, as reasonable as possible. And there's other people who they're frustrated with the insurance companies, so they'll try to take it to a certain extent and get things bought that perhaps aren't needed.
You want to make sure it's legitimate and reasonable.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street. I understand the insurance company's right to pay this. And without the insurance companies, frankly, this hail damage that just wiped out the front range, it blows my mind to think about different markets such as, say, Puerto Rico. They don't necessarily, they've got good insurance policies, but we're lucky to necessarily have that, and they should pay out quite a bit. That being said, my job should be totally unnecessary to get this at the, I think it's 108 plus 15.
Yeah, 108 plus another 15,000. They had a barn, I believe. So,
Yeah.
you know, you're well over $120,000 from the original $60,000. So the homeowner acquired your services, and then once you notify the insurance company that the homeowner is invoking their right to appraisal, then they have 21 days or 20 days to name their appraiser.
20 days to name their appraiser. I wish that they did it every single time. 20 to 30% of the appraisal demand letters we send in, it's day 21, 23, 43. Because unfortunately, there's not a lot of education going on within the carriers themselves regarding what appraisal is. Just slight differences, nuances. I was on an appraisal, and they co-named me on the check because in the system for the carrier, they just has me as a public adjuster. Now, I could go into explain that, but as the appraiser, the independent impartial one, I'm not representing the insured, nor should I be co-named on any checks. But this happens constantly, and I find I'm not just educating homeowners, different contractors, different appraisers and public adjusters, but I'm educating the insurance adjusters on that side too. And it happens both ways. You meet a lot of really interesting, talented, and smart people, but you also meet a number of people who you see different than eye to eye, and it's because they've never questioned simple things like the asphalt starter, the ridge, the overhead and profit, the turkey leg dinner metaphor that I've thrown out there. Because perhaps a number of insureds have taken this and just figured out a way to hire Uncle Bill down the street and get it done.
Mm-hmm. And so once the insurance company names their appraiser, you guys set a time to meet at the property.
Mm-hmm.
You guys meet, you guys go through contractor's estimate, they go through the carrier's estimate, and you essentially break down what's fair, what's legitimate.
That's true. I would say out of the claims that are, unfortunately, the dollar amount does matter in terms of my probability of settling with that fellow appraiser. Because if we have to bring in the umpire, these claims have already lasted a long time. That's the other expense for all of us in the process that goes understated, is the time. Bringing in the fellow umpire is just going to be more time and more fees. So I do my very best to get it done with just that fellow appraiser, so we can get this done, get the claim paid, and it's still not a rocket fast process. I mean, we're talking on $10,000, $25,000, $50,000 differences for residential, 3 to 4 months, maybe 5 months. And on larger ones like this, I'll tell the homeowner 6 to 8 months, maybe even 9. If we finish it in 3, great. But that's the other real big expense here. So from the time I get appraisal demand letter, like you said, to submit it, they have 20 days to name their appraiser. And then the fellow appraiser and I, before we ever meet on site, we're going to name an umpire. Just because if we get out on site and we can't agree regarding the amounts of loss, how are we going to agree on an umpire at this point in time? So we get that umpire named just to be used in case we need them. But back to one of my original points, those $10,000, $25,000, $50,000 residential claims, 80, 85, 90% of them we can settle with just the fellow appraiser versus the umpire, which shows that they're naming somebody who understands it as well. It's purposefully not contentious. This is not a lawsuit. It's purposefully informal. And there's a lot to support why it should be that way and really help get it done, because 3 to 4 months is relatively quick. I understand that.
To double the amount of coverage on your property, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also to add up, we're billing in billable hours, and even though we're an expert that's brought in, our fees are going to be substantially lesser than what an attorney would take. Now, an attorney can certainly get punitive damages. There's 3 buckets that they can go pursue. It's a whole different deal. But again, our practice is to get these things done without ever having to go to that process. Because what we've found is it's always presented as a neater, tighter process than it really is. And after practicing, my firm's done over 1,200 appraisals here in Colorado. After practicing, there's really a need for that versus the court. The courts could not handle all these disputes, especially the small ones, not even small. And once again, they're different deals, but I really have a lot of pride in what we do as appraisers and public adjusters, because it offers an avenue to the insureds that otherwise wouldn't be wouldn't be feasible. It would force them to hire representation that's just going to make the process more difficult than hopefully it needs to be.